Hello, my name is Amber, and I'm here to deliver a presentation to my hypothetical audience of colleagues at a conference. So, my presentation is on yoga and addiction. So, basically, quick overview. We're going to talk about addiction as it affects the dopamine reward system and the learning ability in the brain, and how yoga can impact the brain and kind of like rewire what dopamine and addictive behaviors have done to make people more impulsive and compulsive and high strung and stressed out and in need of different coping mechanisms such as drugs. So, for starters, we're going to talk about the impact of yoga on recovery from substance abuse disorder and also different ways that it can be implemented as a protocol integrated into the 12-step program. So not necessarily replacing conventional methods, but being like in addition to. Alrighty, so first off, let's talk about the addiction cycle. So typically an addiction cycle follows 3 main stages, the first one being the binge phase. So I'm going to use coffee, call myself out here. So for example, let's say you're addicted to caffeine in some way and you just binge out on coffee. You drink like 6 cups in an hour or something crazy like that. Not to call out all the hardcore coffee drinkers out there. So you binge on coffee, and that's the first stage. The second stage would be the negative effects. So getting jittery, getting anxious, maybe getting some heart palpitations, losing your appetite, and so forth. Negative consequence of binging out. The third phase would be anticipation. So this is you've binged, you've had the negative effects, you've come down from it, and now you're anticipating your next hit of coffee. So those are the 3 cycles, and engaging in these activities affects your dopamine receptors. So for example, during the first stage, binging, the dopamine receptor is triggered to induce a stage, like a feeling of euphoria. So you feel really good, it's amazing. Your brain's releasing dopamine, it's going to the receptor, it's making it feel real good. And this creates the sense of reward, gratification, and whatnot. And how this then turns to the prefrontal cortex of your brain. And it learns like, oh, this action makes me feel good. So now you learn the behavior, and now you learn to kind of like crave it later on. And this dysregulates your brain. So you need more and more dopamine in order to feel motivated. And this also impacts stress. So whenever you abuse the dopamine receptors, your ability to cope with stress goes down, and then you crave more dopamine to deal with that stress, and now it like throws off the balance. And then this also affects a different part of your brain that is responsible for inhibitory control, which is basically your ability to curb impulses. So like you think of something, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds great, I'm gonna do that. But then you go, oh, maybe that's not a good idea right now, or I should wait. When you've been frying your dopamine, your brain doesn't have that ability. So you tend to engage in drinking more coffee. Like you just had 6 cups, you felt really bad. And then you came down, and now you're anticipating your next cup of coffee. So you're like, I'm just going to do it. And you're not even thinking about it. And then you feel really bad. So yeah, it's kind of a vicious cycle, because then you crave more and it repeats itself. So where yoga comes into this is, first off, it helps with stress by stimulating the vagal nerve. Yoga is very heavy in breathing exercises, and the vagus nerve is directly related to breathing. So by consciously breathing, you have like a willful interaction with your parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system's ability to switch back and forth. So by breathing, you stimulate the vagal nerve, and this can help you bring down your stress and switch over into that restful state. So for example, let's say you're in the 3rd stage of the addiction cycle, the anticipation stage, and you feel yourself getting stressed out and your body remembers that habit it learned that when you feel stressed out, you can go do this thing, like drink 6 cups of coffee. And that regulates you in the sense of making you feel euphoric and no longer stressed out by abusing dopamine. Instead of drinking your 7th cup of coffee, you can do some breathing exercises to help regulate your nervous system and lower the stress response that is causing you to crave, the addictive cycle. And by switching over to a mindful breathwork based practice of reducing stress and not frying your dopamine receptors more, you allow the part of your brain that's responsible for inhibitory control to, re-regulate itself. Oh boy, and eventually this leads to you being able to produce dopamine on your own without that stimulus. And this has been observed. There was a study done on people who smoke cigarettes, so nicotine, and doing yoga was observed to help people that were dependent on nicotine improve their inhibitory control just like after one session. Now, that's not saying like you're gonna completely lose all your cravings and suddenly be healed and all that. It'd be really cool. Maybe for some people they have that miraculous experience, but the point is just doing it one time helps. Maybe not solve the problem, but helps a lot. So there's also a relationship between trauma and addiction. I'm gonna just go through my notes real quick. Gotta find the page. All right. So yeah, there is a connection between traumatic experiences and substance use disorder. This really just ties back into stress and coping mechanisms. So it's been observed that people that are seeking out treatment for substance use disorder also qualify as having PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is defined as significant physical, psychological, emotional, social, and spiritual impairments that follow exposure to a traumatic event, several events, multiple situations, or anything that the individual perceives as harmful or life-threatening. And it's approximated that 50% of people being treated for substance use disorder meet this criteria for PTSD, and those with a history of trauma tend to be disengaged from their treatment due to symptoms of PTSD, which is like being avoidant, withdrawn, having intrusive thoughts, just generally feeling negative, and then becoming dependent on substances to numb out that those negative feelings. So instead of just taking away their 6 cups of coffee that they've learned to cope with and then leaving them with no tools to cope, you can integrate the yoga, again, for its ability to regulate stress and just learn to breathe to regulate yourself instead of having another cup of coffee or whatever substance of choice you have decided on. So that's just a very important point to make because it's kind of the same thing. It both goes back to the stress response's role in impulsivity. So yeah, that is a good chunk of all that. The importance to all of this is it's just giving other approaches, more affordable approaches, in my opinion, than getting sent off to somewhere fancy and expensive to do it, because not everyone can afford that and has the opportunity to do the best treatment that they possibly could get. And I'm not saying people should just watch YouTube videos at home and follow along to yoga either, instead of getting help if they need help. But this would be something that could help some people if they implemented it into a conventional program. So for example, you're doing 12-step program, you're going through all these principles and whatnot. Maybe you're on some sort of medication to help aid this process chemically, but you don't know how to chill out when you're really stressed out and you're craving another cup of coffee. It would be helpful to just have another option. Like, it's not going to hurt you. There's really no harm here. And I think if more research was done on yoga and its effects on the brain, it could be studied and applied to other diseases, such as like fibromyalgia, like something like that. If this mindful practice, if stress and a way to consciously regulate your stress can affect something like PTSD or addiction, why maybe it could help other things like chronic pain or autoimmune disease, other stress-related diseases and whatnot. So yes, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I hope you enjoyed and learned something, and that is all I have to say. Signing off.